Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, November 10th, 2017. A little more disruption here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, just for good measure. We're still got work ongoing here. Then we tried to do a little bit of the work ourselves, and we screwed everything up. And we were without water from about 10 p.m. last night through this morning. We thought we had it fixed, but instead we just made a bigger mess of things. So fantastic news there, but we were doing our best to try to get the water back on for at least one of the kids to be able to wash up this morning. Washing up out of bottled water is just it's a difficult thing to do, and you don't like to make the kids do it, but we're okay. Everything will be fine. We'll fix it up. Hopefully we haven't damaged anything terribly, but that's not really the top issue this morning. It's just what happens to be going on in the house. I would have to guess, if you forced me, if you, let's say, found me when I was 14 years old and forced me to guess, I might guess that the big news of the day is Roy Moore. This broke after our show. It's too bad we don't have a 24/7 channel available to me personally, although I would be rather exhausted, I think, if that were the case. Roy Moore, Senate candidate in Alabama, and I think we all know his story, the guy that got thrown off of the Supreme Court twice. The guy who has the, largely because of his 10 Commandments monument that he refused to remove, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get to it. There's all sorts of threads we could explore after that. Anyway, Republican nominee for the Senate in Alabama to replace Jeff Sessions, who's a sneaky weasel and a thief, and a racist and a bastard in 10 other ways, I'm sure. Anyway, also not, believe it or not, not originally Donald Trump's favorite, and that becomes harder to believe. But you already know where I'm going. He's now had his candidacy, I was going to say rocked, but they don't care on the Republican side, by allegations, that he's a child molester. How's that? That's essentially what it comes down to. Now, what's been amazing is watching the Republican spin cycle, the conservatives coming out to say, I don't know if that's really fair to say that he was a child molester. First of all women lie about everything, and so therefore, you likely know where we stand with all of this. Republicans are not abandoning him. The language that they have adopted, they've adopted a thoughts and prayers, mass shooting style approach to this latest news. And here's what they're willing to say about it. If proven true, then he should step aside, whatever that means. There's nothing for him to step aside from, but I guess you could try to drop out of the election at this point. Alabama, word is that the Alabama election law says that he cannot be easily replaced on the ballot by the Republican Party of Alabama at this point. But stranger things have happened. Greg Dworkin was reminding people online yesterday that, it was too late to replace Torricelli, Senator Torricelli. You remember Bob Torricelli from New Jersey with Frank Lautenberg when he got himself in legal hot water running up to his attempted re-election effort. And they did it anyway. The New Jersey legislature was under the control of the Democrats, and as I recall, they just basically changed the law and then swapped them. And I guess they could do the same in Alabama, but I don't know if they're going to need to, because he's standing pat. He's sticking with his candidacy, says everybody's lying. And the most any Republican is willing to say is, if proven true, and that's some weasel words. If proven true, then he should step aside. Now, these are 40-plus, I think, year-old charges. I assume they mean by proven true, they would mean by convicting him in a court of law. I don't know what the statute of limitations is on any crimes that he might be charged with there. But I don't think that's in the offing. There's not going to be a trial. There's not going to be any proving this thing true. It's just going to be him saying it's a lie and other people saying it's not. And the preponderance of the evidence will be on her side, because this was an extraordinarily carefully reported story by all accounts. I'm not a journalist. I can't evaluate it for you, but I can say that what it looks like the Washington Post did in pursuing this story was take extreme caution in making sure that they got corroborating evidence and backstory and witnesses and sources. And there are 4 women now in their 50s, I believe, all of them, who allege that this is the case, that Roy Moore approached them when he was in his mid-30s. And, well, I don't know, what are we going to say about it? He didn't rape them, but he certainly molested them. And some with varying degrees of acknowledgement and or what might pass for consent in some cases based on the ages of the girls involved and the involvement of parents. But so there's 4 people making allegations, and there are some 30 sources outside of those 4 that corroborate these stories. I mean, I don't know. We could go and read the story, and we might as well, although you've likely read it yourself at this point. But you'll get a sense, and I'll get a sense of just how. I mean, I didn't read this thing all the way through. I got bits and pieces of it. The headline is what it is. Woman says Roy Moore initiated sexual encounter when she was 14, he was 32. Guys, we might spend all day on this. I don't know. I mean, you know where we're at with this, but I think we need to vent. Well, let's see. I mean, we can start right with the headline. Lots of you did, and it immediately triggered a lot of you. The headline, they didn't know what to do with this one. They weren't sure how far they could go. They weren't sure how far they could push this and not get sued. They're getting sued anyway. Apparently, Roy Moore's wife says she's going to sue about all this. I don't know whether that's really going to come to fruition. It's certainly not going to lead to anything, although it would be extraordinarily enlightening were she to sue, and there would then be discovery and deposition of Roy Moore, and, well, that would be entertaining. P.S. I have to stop just for a second here and turn my attention elsewhere. Political Capital, our good friend Political Capital on Twitter, retweets this from Press TV Breaking. I don't know who that is. I don't know whether they're anything in particular, but they have an art card that's red, and it says breaking news, and it has a picture of the globe on it, so it must be true. Here's the word. Saudi leaders have, it says, clearly declared war on Lebanon Hezbollah movement. And this is according to Nasrallah here. I don't know. That's kind of a weird word. Saudi leaders have clearly declared. Have they declared war, or have they clearly, like, metaphor? I think they've as much as declared war. I can't tell you what's going on, but I just throw that out there in case it's just regular. Yeah, Saudi Arabia has declared war on Lebanon. That would be surprising / not surprising, given what we've learned. Well, we'll keep an eye on that situation. But back to Roy Moore. Woman says Roy Moore initiated sexual encounter. Like I said, that triggered a lot of people right away. You're already using weasel words about this. I mean, what do you mean, initiated sexual encounter? And I thought initiated was kind of a funny word. I mean, it's like, what are we in a Star Trek episode here? Initiating sexual encounter on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Sexual encounter initiated. I don't know what that sexual encounter. I mean, I guess that's what it was. And I don't know. Maybe that's the best you could come up with for a headline, given what you learn they do. Or what Roy does and the others have done to them. Stephanie McCrumman, Beth Reinhard, and Alice, I don't know how she pronounces his last name, Crites, Cretes. I'm mangling like, what is that, 6 letters? It's English. I can't manage it. All right. Well, they've done a hell of a job on this story. Lee Korfman is the woman now getting the bulk of the attention in this because she was 14 at the time. Lee Korfman says she was 14 years old when an older man approached her outside a courtroom in Etowah County, Alabama. I hope I'm pronouncing that one right. She was sitting on a wooden bench with her mother, they both recall, when the man introduced himself as Roy Moore. Hi, how you doing? Roy Moore, child molester. What? Okay. Where are they? They're sitting on a wooden bench. Is that interesting that they're on a wooden bench? Well, where's the wooden bench? It was early 1979, and Moore, now the Republican nominee in Alabama for a U.S. Senate seat, was a 32-year-old assistant district attorney. Responsible gentleman, yes? He struck up a conversation. Good, fine. Assistant district attorney. You're a fine, upstanding member of the community. He struck up a conversation, Korfman and her mother say, and offered to watch the girl while her mother went inside for a child custody hearing. Oh, you're divorced and the dad's maybe elsewhere and you have a 14-year-old daughter? I'll watch her while you go in. He said, oh, you don't want her to go in there and hear all that. I'll stay out here with her, says Korfman's mother, Nancy Wells, 71 now. I thought, how nice for him to want to take care of my little girl. Well, of course, that wasn't what he was up to, but you can appreciate why they thought that might be the case. He was an assistant district attorney and 32 years old. And he had reason to be, skulking around a courtroom or the courthouse. He was the assistant district attorney. It wasn't like he was just scoping the place out, looking for divorced moms and their teenage daughters or anything. Alone with Korfman, Moore chatted with her and asked for her phone number, she says. Of course, as all 32-year-old men do with 14-year-olds who they're just watching while their mom is in a custody hearing. Days later, she says, he picked her up around the corner from her house. I want to underline that for just a second. Around the corner from her house in Gadsden, drove her about 30 minutes to his home in the woods. Boy, man, that really sounds creepy. The first time I read this, by the way, was that I read it just as he drove her 30 minutes into the woods. Like, what? That's way worse than what, but okay, he had a home in the woods. People have homes in the woods. I mean, secluded woods. It's Alabama. I don't know. He's living alone. He's a bachelor fellow, and we find out later on he's living in a mobile home in the woods because he's a district attorney. Where else are they supposed to live? I mean, can you really make a living as an assistant district attorney? Look, he lived alone in the woods. I mean, wasn't a tar paper shack. I guess he had that going for him, but it's less suspicious than I drove her 30 minutes into the woods. But that's basically what he did. He drove for 30 minutes and went into the woods so he takes her to the house, tells her how pretty she is, and kisses her. This is all past tense. Told her how pretty she was and kissed her. On a second visit, she says, he took off her shirt and pants and removed his clothes. He touched her over her bra and underpants, she says, and guided her hand to touch him over his underwear. I'm ill at this point. It's a morning show. I should have taped this last night. I don't know. I mean, after hours, it seems more appropriate. It's a little difficult to get through this at the moment. I wanted it over with. I want it out, she remembers thinking. Please just get this over with. Whatever this is, just get it over. Korfman says she asked Moore to take her home, and he did. Okay. Stopping for a second. Again, you mostly know the story, I'm sure. And you mostly would have seen yesterday. Yesterday, conservatives came out. You had Breitbart out there. Breitbart, by the way, jumped in the middle of this. When they discovered that the Washington Post was ready to publish their story, they jumped out front by, I don't know how much, an hour or so, and published a story that basically said, we're trying to head this off at the pass. And they're going to start lying about Roy Moore in about an hour. And we want you to know the truth is blah, blah, blah. So let's see. There was a round of denials. Roy Moore says all of this is lies. But then Breitbart editors and people at, all over the place, all the usual suspects on the right and alt-right spent the afternoon and evening saying, hey, for one thing, only one of the girls in this story is under the age of consent in Alabama at the time, and now 16 years old. They're researching the age of consent because he's 32 and, he's the assistant district attorney. Did he follow the law is what our chief interest is. Well, the answer is no, because this girl's 14. Then they were like, well, technically speaking, no, another girl he met when she was 14, by the way, met her when she was working as a Santa's helper in the mall. Barf. Give me a break. But he didn't ask her out until she was 16. So they're like, well, so technically that's not a statutory rape. This 14-year-old, well, I don't know. I'm sure they offered all their usual excuses, but maybe she looked 16. Maybe she told him she was 16. Maybe this, maybe that. And it got to, so there's other girls, they were a little older, but they're still only like 17 and 18 years old. It's still, cradle robbing. And that term comes up. One of the mothers, in denying him permission to date her daughter, says, let's not rob the cradle here. So anyway, there were lectures all day about, well, only one of them is a statutory rape. Only one. How many do you want? And then two, well, you all don't understand Southern courtship. What? You don't understand the culture. He's, what about child marriage? I mean, look at the Bible. Of course, he's a Bible thumper, right? And then, of course, first of all, by the way, there's which one of the 10 Commandments? Show me the 10 Commandments where it says I can't pick up 14-year-old Santa's helpers at the mall. That's a good point, idiot. Let me see. You know what? I found it in the 10 Commandments. I'm looking at Roy Moore's, 10-ton granite monument. It's on the underside. I'm going to pick it up. You put your head under there and look for where it is. It's inscribed as number 11. It's clear as day, and God did it if it's underneath this 10-ton monument. And while you're looking, if my phone rings and I drop the thing, whatever, I can't be held responsible. Please sign this release, crush your head under the 10-ton granite monument, and we're all better off. Anyway, it doesn't say anywhere in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not rob the cradle. That's true. But it's implied elsewhere, I would think. But then the defense of, well, look at the Bible. Many biblical figures married young women under the age of 16. Maybe, but of course, a lot of other things were described in the Bible that may or may not have been as described, may or may not have happened exactly as described. But if you're a fundamentalist and a literalist in the Bible, you might point to something like that. However, I will say that the argument went off the rails as far as I'm concerned. I'm not like the world's foremost authority on this stuff, but when you get to the point where you're arguing, as somebody went on television and did, and I think this was the auditor, the state auditor in Alabama, who was apparently a creep in his own right, and we should get his name on the air so that everybody knows it. I'm going to have to look it up and scroll back in my timeline in order to find it. But anyway, his excuse was, this is really a remarkable one, was, well, Joseph, that is to say, Saint Joseph, storied in the New Testament to be the husband of the Virgin, yes, Mary, mother of Jesus. He was an adult and a carpenter. Thank you for pointing that out. When he was, I guess, wedded to Mary. And then here's this for weasel words. Where is this thing? He said, I should quote it directly, but I'll get there. He said, well, Mary and Joseph, she was underage and he was an adult when they became the parents of Jesus, which is right up there with initiated sexual encounter, just in terms of like, well, what are you trying to say here, man? Because became the parents of Jesus. Is that supposed to count? I mean, the whole thing is that she's a virgin and the conception is immaculate. Yes? I mean, the guy is like sparking a major global theological crisis. And why? Tax cuts. Did you see this one coming? They're throwing the Holy Family under the bus for tax cuts. Now, they're not my Holy Family, and I don't want to invoke everybody else's religion here, but I think there are people who take this seriously out there. And yeah, this was the defense. Aaron Blake was tweeting this one around. It's Alabama State Auditor Jim Ziegler, Ziegler, Ziegler. I don't know how he says it. Who cares? He's a disgusting, filthy old bastard. Take Joseph and Mary, please. Take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became parents of Jesus. Now, I don't know how old, I mean, a teenager, 19 is a teenager, 13 is a teenager. I don't know whether she was under 16. Nobody ever, I don't ever recall hearing anybody discussing in Sunday school or whatever. I wouldn't have been in this Sunday school, but maybe you remember. Was she 16? Was she 15? I didn't even know how old she was. A teenager. Are we sure about that? Is it in the Bible? I don't know. And I love this one. They became the parents of Jesus. Well, how did that happen exactly? One, we don't know. Two, if you believe the story, Joseph had nothing to do with it. All he did was say, well, I like this Mary woman, and it seems that she's pregnant, and it wasn't me, and I'm going to take care of her. Nobody else around doing anything, so I'll help out here. I don't recall him taking her into the woods and guiding her hand onto his loincloth or anything like that. But again, I haven't really read the New Testament closely. Maybe those of you who have can remember the verse we're talking about. I thought it might be in 2 Corinthians, right? When 2 Corinthians love each other very much, then it's okay when this stuff happens. But I guess it's probably not. I did write a tasteless joke about this yesterday, because all jokes about this are tasteless. But it is a morning radio program, and those are the sorts of things we do here. I was wondering, do you know what Roy Moore's favorite Bible chapter is? The answer is Acts 16. Because that's the excuse he's going to go. I don't know how old she is. She acts 16. People thought I should go with Acts 14 on that one, but I think that it doubles as an excuse at the same time, as well as being a punchline. I don't know that there's a perfect punchline to deliver this one with. Anyway, I thought that was a rather unique defense. Take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager. Joseph was an adult. They became the parents of Jesus, but not in the traditional way. So I was surprised to find out how important tax cuts really were to these guys. We want that Senate seat. And if it takes throwing our theology under the bus, we will do it. St. Joseph, F you, under the bus, buddy. You're a pig. I can't, but certainly Roy Moore is no worse than St. Joseph, I guess, adoptive step-parent of Jesus. I don't know. How do you refer? Okay. I'm moving on from that particular portion of the show. And we'll continue with the story just to get more opportunity to discuss how ridiculous it is for people to be defending him. 2 of Korfman's childhood friends say she told him at the time that she was seeing an older man. And one says Korfman identified the man as Moore. Wells says her daughter told her about the encounter more than a decade later, as Moore was becoming more prominent as a local judge. This part of the story gets into the question of when does she speak up, why does she speak up, why not sooner, why at all, etc. And it's an interesting question. Definitely an interesting aspect of this story. Not as interesting as the fact that Roy Moore is a child molester, but it goes a long way. It ties in with all the other sexual predation stories we're hearing, and there are many more of them each day, each minute. So it's important to know. Aside from Korfman, 3 other women interviewed by the Washington Post in recent weeks say Moore pursued them when they were between the ages of 16 and 18, and he was in his early 30s. Episodes they say they found flattering at the time, and that is interesting, okay, but troubling as they got older. And it's not just, but I think it is partially perhaps that culture changes that came about changed things. I mean, it is true that people used to, in fact, marry earlier on average, but still not that early. And it's also true that there's the cultural phenomenon of, and they describe it pretty bluntly in this piece, that young girls do get flattered sometimes when older men pay attention to them without really thinking through the ramifications of everything that's going on. They're just, they're I don't know, flattered. They're amazed at themselves and their ability to be able to attract attention without thinking through all of the implications. And then when they finally do, they mature a little bit and they come to realize exactly what was going on here and what was at stake, even though, thank God, most of the worst didn't happen. What was at stake here? And they realize, wow, that was really super wrong. I wish I had recognized that earlier. So like they say, episodes that they found flattering at the time but troubling as they got older. None of the three women say that Moore forced them into any sort of relationship or sexual contact. And that is what his defenders are now latching onto. They're actually trying to, if not going so far as to say, one of the major religions of, global religions under the bus in order to save us here, they are falling back on, well, he didn't rape them, he didn't force this or that. This is sort of, he's being like they asked to go home, he brought them. He's a Southern gentleman, and, they, back in those days, they married earlier. It's not the, 1800s. It's the 1970s. But in our culture, I don't know. I don't know exactly how they were trying to frame this whole thing. But like I was saying this morning on Twitter, just before the show, and just before our break, I'll tell you this. All you really need to know about how he dealt with Lee Corfman has been told already. It was in the paragraph I read to you a few minutes ago. The fact that he arranged to meet her around the corner from her house when he picked her up for these little dates to take her 30 minutes away to his home in the woods. The fact that he arranged to pick her up around the corner is all you need to know about, well, is this Southern courtship culture? Was he really a gentleman at heart and he wasn't going to do anything and he wasn't going to force her to do anything like that? All you need to know is he picked her up around the corner, out of sight of her mom, which I remind you again, he met her and her mom at the custody hearing outside the courtroom. He knew she was divorced. Dad wasn't going to be around. But, why wouldn't Mr. Southern courtly manners want to shake Dad's hand or greet Mom and tip his straw bowler on the way out for the date? Gee whiz, I don't know. Maybe because he's actually a disgusting fiend. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show right here on Netroots Radio. We got to pick up on this point here. We have our friend Thelonious08, now labeling himself as Blue Frog Frisky. You tell me what that means. Has this objection, but I don't think I want to let it get too far because I think we're barking up the wrong tree here. Well, first of all, of course, he points out nobody has any idea how old Joseph and Mary were or if they actually existed, and that's probably true. But assuming they existed, as many people do, I wondered if they ever tried to put an age to any of them. There are several biblical figures that I know that they've tried to hang an age on, or that the Bible itself hangs an age on, although most of them are difficult to believe. They don't seem to have had either the same life expectancy back then, but God, so there you go, or the same understanding of age, or I don't know what, or just a bent for hyperbole. I don't know, wherever you want to lay the blame on that. I don't think people were 600 years old, whatever. But okay, I interpret the Bible differently than other people. But more to the point, there is this comment. He says, you ridiculed initiated sexual encounter, and I did do that. But everything you've said so far supports that it is true. Well, it is true. It's just that it triggered people into questioning. Why don't you, for instance, say what about if the headline were, let's see, woman says Roy Moore molested her when she was 14. He was 32. Why doesn't it say that? And the answer is the post is being cautious here. They don't want to jump right into a lawsuit, and that would be much more. I'm sure that they had a discussion with their legal team and with their editorial staff and tried to come up with what's the approach here? Not even what's the, most aggressive thing we can get away without being sued, but really what's the responsible way of putting it? They might have said, what's the most clinical way of putting it? And that is it. That way, they basically probably thought if we put it in the most clinical possible terms, the likelihood of our getting sued and the strength of our grounds of defense will, they'll just be that much better. And I'm pretty sure that's probably what they were thinking. They're not wrong. The trigger for other people, not me, was this initiated sexual encounter thing. For me, the initiated sexual encounter, what it triggered in me was, that sounds so weird and funny. Initiated sexual encounter, as though it were Star Trek, etc. That's where I went with it. I'm not going, I have no other problem with it beyond that. It was other people who are either advocates or survivors themselves of this kind of, whatever you want to call it. Do I have a formulation for you that's better? I say molested. I think that's what happened here, and I don't think the Post would have been wrong to say it, though I think they would have put themselves in legal danger, possibly, or more legal danger, had they said it. I understand why they didn't do it. I don't understand why I should be limited to it. Initiated sexual encounter, that's not natural language for me. I say he molested her. That's my formulation, to the extent that I have got one. So he says, you ridiculed initiated sexual encounter, but everything you've said so far supports that it's true. Again, we concede that it is. You have not suggested anything better, nor explained why your version is better. I don't think I had anything else at the time, but it did prompt me to think that perhaps my version, which I didn't really have in mind, my version would be molested. Why is it better? Because that's what he did. Initiated sexual encounter. I'm not even certain that it was a sexual encounter for her. It was just molestation. She clearly didn't have any sexual feelings for him at the time, or she certainly doesn't express them here. It may have been a sexual encounter for him, but for her it was a molestation. So I guess I didn't start the morning thinking I had a better formulation, but now I think I got a better one. He also comments, though, and this I think more to some of our other points. All throughout history, in every culture, in every corner of the world, girls become women at puberty, and marriage or sex is normal. Marriage/sex is what it says, is normal for them from that point on, except the USA for the last 50 years. And that is probably, that's truthy sounding. I actually went to check just because Roy Moore is such a complainer about the creeping Sharia law. I wondered what Sharia law would have to say about this, but, trying to understand Sharia law through Wikipedia is just a futile effort, I think. You just have to talk to somebody who's already an expert in it and has had some training in it. But I did find out that, I guess, traditionally under what would pass for Sharia law, and there are many different interpretations of Sharia law because there are many different Muslim cultures. But generally speaking, I think what Thelonious says here is about right. That they don't nail it to an age. We do, because I don't know exactly why, what the theory is here. But I guess we just like bright line rules better, so we can point at people and say, I don't care if she was physically mature at that point. I know what we're trying to say is they don't have the, mental maturity, the intellectual maturity to make those decisions and therefore consent. But surely some do and some don't, depending on the age. I guess there's a point at which you can say it will always be uncomfortable to argue that they are that they are possessed of enough maturity to consent. And that age is probably somewhere in the teens. And you might even be right. But we like bright line rules, and that's just a cultural preference for us, leaving aside all the sexual hang-ups that go with it. But yeah, as far as Sharia law is concerned, they basically say, well, at puberty, whenever that is, and their rationale is it's different for everybody, so why would you try to nail it down to a number? And it makes a certain amount of sense, but that's all I'll say about it, because I don't really want to get into the rest of the discussion. Like, I don't know when you or anyone you know or anyone you theorize about reaches sexual maturity physically and intellectually? I don't know. I have no idea. Is 16 a pretty good number? You know, the question arises under color of criminal law, thankfully, infrequently enough and in circumstances that are generally clear enough that we can handle these things with a empaneled jury of 12 peers to figure out what's going on. And I couldn't tell you. And it's up to them. And I don't know. I have no answer for you. But all I'm saying is I thought initiated sexual encounter was awkward, and probably so did the post. But they had their reasons for going with it, and we know what they are, or we can guess anyway. Let's see. Yes, there are other observations to make here, and a couple others that have come in. Rebecca Romans sends me two here. First, Matthew Chapman's observation. I must say I legitimately never thought slut-shaming the Virgin Mary would ever be used as a political defense. I do think that was a surprise. I don't think that is what they thought they were doing, but I don't think they very often know what they're doing. But here in this situation, neither do I. Let's see. Also, a good point being brought up. This one circulated on Twitter by the Horse Whisperer, as in Hoarse. As a judge, Roy Moore cast the lone dissenting vote in an 8-1 decision, essentially arguing against the legal premise of statutory rape. Well, okay. He's got his inclinations, I guess, and I think that's probably important. What else do we have here? Judd Legum's comment, also retweeted to me by Rebecca. This argument, she says, now seems a bit self-serving. Moore essentially arguing that an adult or near adult having sex with a young teen is illegal, but not necessarily rape unless there is affirmative evidence that the adult threatened or attacked the victim. And that gets directly to the definition of statutory rape. And, well, it's a policy argument. That's about it. I don't think I can help Roy Moore out of that one. All I can say, though, is all we're arguing about here is whether there ought to be a bright line rule and how. What age are you uncomfortable defending the possibility that the participants may have known exactly what they were doing, or at least enough about it? And does anybody ever know exactly what they're doing? I don't know why 18 makes you feel any better, or for that matter, 32. I mean, people who have been married for 10 years or I guess probably less to be a typical couple, but, married a couple of years, and at 28, 26, 22 for that matter, find themselves pregnant. Does anybody, really believe that every single one of them knew exactly what they were getting into? Because they didn't. They may have known, sure, they may even have been trying to become pregnant, but, every new parent will tell you, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, basically. So, I don't know. I guess, where do you want to draw the line? At what point do you need to know what the consequences are and what you're really getting into? And at what point is it okay for you not to have any clear idea, right? At age 32, you have your first child. Very late, right? Or relatively late. Actually, it's about average now, probably, whatever. Well, maybe not average. Anyway, it's within the standard deviation. And, parents, intelligent people. For instance, my youngest brother, as a matter of fact, will tell you, we have the baby. He's a doctor. His wife's a doctor. We don't know what we're doing. Oh, my God. That's just, we'll figure it out. We'll be but, is it okay to then say, well, you didn't know the consequences, so it's statutory rape, even though you're married and both in your 30s? No. But, okay, we draw lines in this country. And I'm okay with the ones about 15, 14-year-olds, to be honest. I don't argue about it too much. I say grow up a little bit, but maybe I'm old-fashioned. Someone could talk me out of it. Just not Roy Moore, because he's not doing anything to help himself with this. All right. So, yes, there were other people involved here. Where were we when we left off? Right. None of the women say that Moore forced them into anything. Wendy Miller says she was 14 and working as a Santa's helper at the Gadsden Mall when Moore first approached her. But She was 16 when he asked her on dates, which her mother forbade. So again, the Southern gentlemanly, chivalrous, courtship ritual thing is out the window. He doesn't tell Lee's mom, I'm dating her. He doesn't tell, or maybe, I guess Wendy tells her mom, and mom says no, and they do it anyway. But, does Roy at any point say, this troubles me, your mom is never around when we get together, and I was just wondering, is she okay with this? Because he's chivalrous. He's just courting, you see. That never happens. That's problematic. That's what you really need to know about this. He knew what he was getting into. He knew what he was trying to get to. And he knew that mom and or dad would be an impediment to that. So he cut them out of the process because gentlemanly. So he waits 2 years on Santa's helper. That's nice. Debbie Wesson Gibson, which is great because Debbie Gibson says she was 17 when Moore spoke to her high school civics class and then asked her out on the first of several dates that did not progress beyond kissing. That is fantastic. So, but by the way, really, he came as assistant DA to speak to the high school civics class, and then he's like, well, it's a bit of a meat market, the high school civics class. You can't hardly blame him, right? What? Asking the students out? Please. Holy mackerel. I mean, those are some seriously creepy scenarios. So far, out of the 3 that we've read about so far. 1, he picks her up at the child custody hearing. 2, he meets her as a Santa's helper, but respectfully keeps his distance for a little while until she becomes of legal age. Like, did you maybe get in trouble or start sweating it after Lee and start to think, maybe I ought to at least stick to the 16 and up crowd? And then he graduates, almost literally, to high school and starts picking up the girls in class. That's really amazing. Now, here's the last one. Gloria Thacker Deason says she was an 18-year-old. Good. That's better, I guess. Still not old enough, in my view, as a moral scold. But cheerleader. Oh, really? Okay. An 18-year-old cheerleader. Of course, she's a cheerleader. When Moore began taking her on dates, by the way, those dates included bottles of Mateus Rosé wine. The legal drinking age in Alabama was 19. I learned from Twitter, and I guess I haven't verified it elsewhere, though, that Roy Moore is, being a bit of a moral scold himself, is a teetotaler. I don't know if he was always a teetotaler, but imagine if he refused strong drink on religious grounds, but in the meantime was funneling wine into the mouths of 18-year-old cheerleaders to see if he could loosen them up a bit and get in their pants. But no alcohol for him. I don't know. Maybe he became a teetotaler later. Maybe he got so bombed on this rosé that, one of those things. I'll never drink again. I swear to God, I'll never drink again. Just get me through this night. Mateus Rosé wine, I guess, could do that to you. Of the 4 women, the youngest at the time was Korfman, who is the only one who says she had sexual contact with Moore that went beyond kissing. She says they did not have intercourse. I am glad of that. In a written statement, Moore denied the allegations. Completely false, desperate political attack by the Democrat Party and the Washington Post on this campaign. Moore, who is now 70, said, the campaign said in a subsequent statement that if the allegations were true, they would have surfaced during his previous campaigns, adding, this garbage is the very definition of fake news. Of course. Thank you so much for that one. After the Post published this story Thursday afternoon, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and a handful of other GOP senators said Moore must step aside if Korfman's account is true. Not the rest of them, but I guess just Korfman's? I don't know. That's the way it's formulated. According to campaign reports, none of the women has donated to or worked for Moore's Democratic opponent, Doug Jones, or his rivals in the Republican primary, including Senator Luther Strange, whom he defeated this fall in a runoff election. Korfman, 53 now, works as a customer service representative at a payday loan business, says she has voted for Republicans in the past 3 presidential elections, including for Donald Trump in 2016. Since I just did that, I'm like, you have reached the voicemail of Donald Trump. Please leave a message after the beep. Thank you. I imagine that's what happens when you get a cell phone number. Do you think he puts that in there, or do you think maybe, I don't know. Anyway, she says she thought of confronting Moore personally for years and almost came forward publicly during his first campaign for a state Supreme Court in 2000, but decided against it. Now remember, they can't be true. These allegations can't be true, because if they were true, they would have come forward earlier. Once again, if you're embarrassed or shamed or afraid to come forward, that doesn't mean your story isn't true, but that's the way the perpetrators and their defenders like to use it. This is pretty amazing. So, okay, what was she thinking? One wonders, well, why not? You imagine yourself in the situation and see yourself as incredibly brave. Or maybe not. Lots of people, most of the people talking about these subjects say, I can't believe how brave these people are. I would never have the guts, even though I know it's the right thing to do. This is what's so troubling about sexual attack and sexual molestation and rapes and harassment that we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks. Is it destroys the people involved. And, maybe they didn't have a great deal of self-confidence to begin with, and what little they had is gone. Or maybe they did, or maybe they had a bright, shining future and were full of confidence, and it destroys it. So she considered coming forward during his first big-time campaign, just like he says she ought to have done if she were telling the truth. But she decided against it. Why? Her 2 children were still in school then, and she worried about how it would affect them. Of course, it would be in the newspaper. Your mom, when she was 14, and of course they'd be blaming her. What a slut. Your mom's a slut. Ha. They would have been laughing at the kids. She's very right to be concerned, at a minimum. She also was concerned that her background, 3 divorces, and a messy financial history might undermine her credibility. That is true. And why is it part of the story? How do we know it? It's reported rather thoroughly by the Washington Post. Why? Because they knew that would be the first line of attack by Moore's defenders. They would look into her background and attack her and say, well, listen to who you're listening to here. Thrice divorced, with a messy financial background, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, we could spend some time discussing the possible effects of Moore's molestation on her, that she, does that have anything to do with the fact that she's divorced 3 times? I don't know. She probably doesn't know for sure either. You could only talk to a psychiatrist, who had worked with her to get any sort of idea about it, but certainly there's the theory out there that sometimes the victims of this kind of sexual molestation and sexual violence have difficulty forming what we would call normal adult relationships later in life. I don't know. She doesn't say it. She doesn't offer it up. I don't think it's even hinted in here, but maybe because, again, the same reasoning that led them to the headline that they settled on might lead them to simply hint strongly that this is a possibility, but leave it alone beyond that. But yes, they investigated it thoroughly, and they lay it all out there too by way of affirmative defense of their own reporting. Yes, we know what her history is. There is no one here that doesn't know that I'm not an angel, Korfman says, referring to her hometown of Gadsden. Korfman described her story consistently in 6 interviews with the Post. Why do they tell you that? Again, affirmative defense of the reporting. We had interviewed her several times, and 6 times we asked her to recount the story, and it was consistent from time to time to time. We looked for inconsistencies to see if there were any, to see if the story was shaky, to see if we ought to run with it, to see if we would be believed if we reported it, to see how we might be attacked once we did report it. This is some thorough work. The Post confirmed that her mother attended a hearing at the courthouse in February 1979 through divorce records. So the story of meeting on the bench outside the courthouse checks out. Moore's office was down the hall from the courtroom. He would have had reason to be there too. It works. Neither Korfman nor any of the other women sought out the Post. That too was likely to be the next round of attack. Well, you dug this up. You wanted dirt on Moore because you're politically aligned against him. You wanted to undermine his candidacy. Maybe, but this doesn't help prove it. Nobody came to the Post. Nobody was looking for publicity here. While reporting a story in Alabama about supporters of Moore's Senate campaign, because that's a news story, a Post reporter heard that Moore allegedly had sought relationships with teenage girls. I was down on the ground in Alabama covering the race, and somebody said, by the way, I heard that Moore has a thing for young girls, and and the rumors used to be that XYZ. Well, these girls used to tell their friends what was going on, so that would spread. Over the ensuing 3 weeks, 2 Post reporters contacted and interviewed the 4 women. All were initially reluctant to speak publicly, but chose to do so after multiple interviews, saying they thought it was important for people to know about their interactions with Moore. The women say they don't know one another. Also, another thing, they got together, they colluded, they conspired to take him down. Well, they didn't. I have prayed over this, Korfman says, explaining why she decided to tell her story now. All I know is that I can't sit back and let this continue. Let him continue without the mask being removed. Fair enough, right? And I mean, you might even think, she might even be thinking, well, you know what? As long as people know, if they decide that they don't think it matters, that's up to them. They can reconcile it however they want, but I didn't want this to be hidden. That could, at a minimum, right? I mean, she may also say, I also don't want him to win. I don't think he deserves it. I wonder how she's voting in all this. The account is based on interviews with more than 30 people. Again, affirmative defense of the reporting here being offered. More than 30 people who said they knew Moore between 1977 and 82 when he served as assistant district attorney for Etowah County in northern Alabama, where he grew up. Moore was 30 and single. They actually make a thing out of this. The defenders were, well, he was a single guy. He was a single successful guy. I can hang out with any Santa's helpers I want, I guess. His first government job, he was 30 and single when he joined the district attorney's office. His first government job after attending the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Everyone please stand. Thank you. Serving in Vietnam, graduating from law school and working briefly as a lawyer in private practice in Gadsden, the county seat. By his account, chronicled in his book, So Help Me God, oh boy, Moore spent his time as a prosecutor convicting murderers, rapists, not statutory, but pardon me, just regular rapists, the bad kind, murderers, rapists, thieves, and drug pushers. He writes that it was around this time that I fashioned a plaque of the 10 Commandments on 2 redwood tablets. P.S. It was also about this time that I was scoping out the Santa's helpers, but I didn't put that in there because I'm so proud of my courtly manners. Thank you very much. I believed that many of the young criminals whom I had to prosecute would not have committed criminal acts if they had been taught these rules as children, Moore writes, and maybe that's what he was after. Lee, have you heard about the 10 Commandments? I want to tell you, let me tell you about one of them that's not in there. Outside work, Moore writes that he spent his free time building rooms onto a mobile home in Gallant. I don't know if that's Gallant or Gallant, you tell me. A rural area about 25 miles west of Gadsden. Well, okay. That's nice. That's the 30 minutes into the woods there. So he spent his free time building rooms onto a mobile home, and that's a fine pursuit. Just so long as there's not like a well in the basement where you put your dates and have them put the lotion on their skin, or else get the hose again. That would be the bad kind of room building on there. But whatever. I'm not saying he did that. I'm just saying James Gum was a Vietnam veteran too. According to what did I just say? What are you gasping at? According to colleagues and others who knew him at the time, Moore was rarely seen socializing outside work. That's because his socializing was done in the woods. He spent one season coaching the Gallant Girls, a softball team that his teenage sister had joined. Wow. Oh, where's the sister? Said several women who played on the team. He spent time working out at the Gadsden YMCA, according to people who encountered him there, and he often walked, usually alone, around the newly opened Gadsden Mall. Now, that sounds like something you might do when you're 70, but he was doing it when he was 32. 6 feet tall and well-dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, say several women who worked there at the time. As people were taking note of those in button-down shirts, I guess, in those days in Alabama. I seen a guy with sleeves. He come around here all the time. Wow, okay. I'm sorry It was stereotypical and wrong of me. Thank you. I admit my error. Korfman describes herself as a little lost, a typical 14-year-old kid of a divorced family, maybe. When she says she first met Moore that day in 1979 outside the courtroom, she says she felt flattered that a grown man was paying attention to her. He was charming and smiley, she says. After her mother went into the courtroom, Korfman says Moore asked her where she went to school, what she liked to do, and whether he could call her sometime. She remembers giving him her number and says he called not long after. At least he didn't wait a long time like some of those dirtbag guys, right? She says she talked to Moore on the phone in her bedroom, and they made plans for him to pick her up at Alcott Road and Riley Streets around the corner from her house. That's where I got that part. I was kind of giddy, excited, an older guy, Korfman says, adding that her only sexual experience at that point had been kissing boys her age. That is fairly typical, yes? And even the flattery. It's just, you're too young. That's why we have these laws, why we have these line drawing exercises. Are you old enough to know what you're getting into? All right. She says it was dark and cold when he picked her up and that she thought they were going out to eat. Instead, she says he drove her to his house, which seemed far, far away. I remember the further I got from my house, the more nervous I got, Korfman said. There's the sexual maturity level kicking in. You're saying, I might not be ready for this. I can at least recognize something that I wasn't counting on and it might not be right for me, maybe about to happen. She remembers an unpaved driveway, which, is normal out there, but now it's becoming a mounting scene of creepiness. She remembers going inside and him giving her alcohol on this visit or the next. Oh my. And then at some point she told him she was 14. So I guess that's out there and on the record too. She says they sat and talked. She remembers that Moore told her she was pretty, put his arm around her and kissed her, and that she began to feel nervous and asked him to take her home, which she says he did. Soon after, she says he called again and picked her up again at the same spot. That spot is bothering me a little bit. I don't know how much longer we'll go on with this, but we got to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We are, I'm spending the break time rounding up all the rest of the commentary that has come through. So far we have at least one LOL, which I guess we'll take as a mark of approval for the he was wearing sleeves. I'm really sorry about that one. I mean, Alabama, you don't deserve it. But, wow, I don't know. Take it in the spirit of, never mind. I shouldn't try to justify it. Never. Okay, others that, let's see, what other ones can we add to the mix here? Let's see. Here's a comment that Kate Sherrill has sent us here from Raw Story. Alabama GOP lawmaker Roy Moore accusers should be prosecuted for not coming forward sooner. How do you like that? That sounds like a reasonable response. It should be against the law to not report these abuses until later. I'm not even, I wonder what the justification is. Do we care? I mean, we care because it's outrageous. I don't know whether I can divert to that or not, but it may be that you know all you need to know from that headline. Very often the case, I think Kate has an eye for the headlines. And honestly, though we have a good time parsing the stories, sometimes that's all you need to know. Who's the legislator we're talking about here? We might as well put his name on the record. Alabama State Representative Ed Henry. Interesting. Okay. Well, there you have it. He says that he wanted someone to bring charges against the women who accused Roy Moore in an interview with the Cullman Times. Henry raged that the women interviewed in the Washington Post bombshell report about Moore's sexual behavior waited so long to publicly accuse him of having improper relations with them when they were teens. If they believe this man is predatory, they are guilty of allowing him to exist for 40 years. So, okay. I mean, I guess that means he's for the death penalty for Moore if they're right. So, I don't know. Maybe we ought to take this guy up on his invitation and say, all right, now, at their trials, they will offer as affirmative defenses that they were frightened of the possibility of reprisals against them. And, of course, your having put them on trial has vindicated that fear. And now what? I don't know whether they would escape the charges. I don't know how the law he proposes would be written. But we would almost certainly be developing a record that would require a capital punishment trial for Mr. Moore following that, because he's not allowed to exist. I guess we shouldn't explore it too critically, because it's Looney Tunes, and we should drop it and just after we say Ed Henry should lose office immediately. He should be expelled, but those of you at the ballot box who have something to do with it, I imagine he's in a district where there's nothing to be done about it, but you should possibly give it a shot. Never imagine that nothing can be done about it. A lot of people, the story of the day on Wednesday was how many people say dumbass things like this and then got bounced out of office by women who were angered by it. So, take some inspiration there if you live in Alabama and you live in Ed Henry's district. Okay, let's see. Other comments? Let's see what else we can scroll back and find here. Rebecca also sends us this one. Who could have predicted this? Oh, Puerto Rico. Oh, yeah. Totally different story, but we might as well drop it in there on the record. Millions of Puerto Ricans just lost power again after a line repaired by Whitefish Energy, you remember them, failed. So good job on your bazillion-dollar contract there. Do you want us to leave the country? Is that what you want? You want us to leave and then you'll have to get some other contractors? Well, maybe that's not such a bad idea, considering the lines you're fixing are falling apart. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, there's much more here, and other stories essentially, and we'll see. Oh, let's see. While we're staying on the same story, we've got this comment here. Triceps Lapano, is what we're going to call you? J. I don't know what J is your first initial here, but triceps. Congratulations on your triceps. Jill, Jamie, Jessica, guessing Lapano. Let's see. No need to waffle, she says. If 16 is a consenting age, it's 100% not. I don't give a crap. We'll help you out on that one. What Alabama lawmakers thought. Yeah. There's not really, but I like to take all viewpoints into consideration, I guess, but no need to waffle for me. I don't believe I've ever bothered anybody at all, but I'm sure that's not the case. Somebody must have a different feeling about something I did at some point, but under 16, well, not while I was 32, I can tell you that. And quite honestly, not when I was 16 either. Sad trombone for me. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Oh, another comment here on a similar subject. Adkeratic. ADK erratic. We did this before, right? And I wasn't sure how you wanted to say it, and it's been a while. It's not just the ability to give consent. Young teenage girls are not physically mature enough to bear children, even though they menstruate. Well, yes. Although, well, I mean, some of them do. They do bear children. Some do. I don't know. I don't know if this is worth continuing with. Not for me, anyway. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm aware of that. That's the best I can do for you. But all the comments are appreciated. I dove into this, right? So why wouldn't you dive into this? This is the point of this. I think we're doing well anytime we get this much commentary, so long as it's not, oh my God, you're crazy, I'm never going to listen again. You're disgusting, I hate you. We're doing well. The constructive comments and additions from many listeners today, and I thank you for it. Is there more? No, not at the moment. That's the answer. It's pregnant pause. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to scare anybody. All right, let's get back to the Washington Post here, at least for some time here. There's a hell of a lot more going on in the world. I don't know if you know this, but it is worth getting up to date on this and getting a flavor for just what we're talking about down here. I didn't realize that he was, for instance, giving alcohol to the 14-year-old as well. So where were we? She drove him back, or he drove her back after she said she wanted to get out of there, and I'm glad that happened. It doesn't make me think any better of him, really, but I'm relieved that was the case. But He calls again because he thought maybe he could get further this time. This was a new experience, and it was exciting and fun and scary, Korfman says. And that sounds about right for a teenage girl, about a pretty good explanation of what would be going on in your head. Explaining why she went back. It was just like this roller coaster ride you've not been on. She says that Moore drove her back to the same house after dark, but that before long she was lying on a blanket on the floor. Because why not? The floor is a great place. Did he have just a single bed? I don't know. No bed, no mattress. I don't know. She remembers Moore disappearing into another room and coming out with nothing on but tight white underwear. Yeehaw. That's what he'd be wearing in 1979. She remembers that Moore kissed her and that he took, do I really want to do this? We got this point earlier. It is disturbing. She says, he guided her hand to his underwear and that she yanked her hand back. I wasn't ready for that. I had never you know what? Oh my lordy. Well, I mean, it's a clinical term. I had never put my hand on a man's penis, much less an erect one, Korfman says. I might as well get it out there. Why hide it? Why give him the benefit of hiding what happened here? She remembers thinking, I don't want to do this. I need to get out of here. Good. She says she got dressed and asked Moore to take her home, and that he did. I want to say good again. It's not good. She shouldn't be there. She shouldn't have been there in the first place. But okay, he takes her home. Hooray. The legal age of consent in Alabama, then as now, is 16. Under Alabama law in 1979 and today, a person who is at least 19 years old who has sexual contact, initiates a sexual encounter, for instance, with someone older than 12 and younger than 15, has committed sexual abuse in the second degree. By the way, so they're codifying this, as we do here in the United States, as Thelonious pointed out, and maybe we're alone in that. And in Alabama, they see fit to say, well, you know, at least she was 12. I don't know what to do with that one, but also I guess that, I don't know. Alabama, work it out. You're not the only state that does that. Sexual contact is defined as touching of sexual or intimate parts. The crime is a misdemeanor, punishable and publishable at that, by up to 1 year in jail. Should be more. But whatever, they've made their decision. The law then and now includes a section on enticing a child younger than 16 to enter a home with the purpose of proposing sexual intercourse or fondling of sexual and genital parts. It's almost like they saw him coming. That is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Well, they really didn't mean for that to happen, eh? In Alabama, the statute of limitations for bringing felony charges involving sexual abuse of a minor in 1979 would have run out 3 years later. Punish them! And the time frame for filing a civil complaint would have ended when the alleged victim turned 21, according to Child USA, a nonprofit research and advocacy group at the University of Pennsylvania. Korfman never filed a police report or a civil suit. She says after their last encounter, Moore called again, but that she found an excuse to avoid seeing him. She says that at some point during or soon after her meetings with Moore, she told two friends in vague terms that she was seeing an older man. Betsy Davis, who remains friendly with Korfman and now lives in Los Angeles, says she clearly remembers Korfman talking about seeing an older man named Roy Moore when they were teenagers. She says Korfman described an encounter in which the older man wore nothing but tight white underwear. She says she was firm with Korfman that seeing someone as old as Moore was out of bounds. I remember talking to her and telling her it's not a good idea, Davis says, because we were so young. Good, okay. A second friend who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of losing her job, but we should prosecute her anyway, has a similar memory of a teenage Korfman telling her about seeing an older man. After talking to her friends, Korfman said she began to feel that she had done something wrong and kept it a secret for years. I felt responsible, she says. I felt that I had done something bad, and it kind of set the course for me doing other things that were bad. So we do have a little bit of that going on, I guess, at least in her own mind. She says that her teenage life became increasingly reckless, with drinking, drugs, boyfriends, and a suicide attempt when she was 16. There you go, Roy. Well done. As the years went on, Korfman says she did not share her story about Moore, partly because of the trouble in her life. She has had 3 divorces and financial problems. While living in Arizona, she and her second husband started a screen printing business that fell into debt. Big deal. Do you see what they're dragging out of her? This is, I'm adding this. Now, I've just considered skipping this part because why should I do this? Why bother? This is not relevant. But I'm going to read it because it's relevant to the lengths to which the Washington Post went to make sure that their story was solid. So I'm admitting this evidence on other grounds, I guess, for you lawyers in the audience. You see what they did? I mean, they investigated each of these things. They know these stories inside and out because they checked it out to see, are we being misled here? Are we going to get caught out here? Are we going to be answering attacks here? And the answer to all of that is yes. Not being caught out there. But would you be attacked for it? Yes. Would they find this out? Yes. Would they try to offer it up as proof that she's lying? Yes. Can you head that off by reporting it now? Maybe. So they try. And that's the point of including it here. Really. You see what kind of scandalous stuff she's involved in? Why, did you know? I do declare, did you know? I say, did you know? I'm making fun of you Alabamans again. That her second husband started a screen printing business that fell into debt. Really? Like every other business, like the president's businesses, like every business fell into debt. It's a screen printing business. I think we could anticipate that. They filed for bankruptcy protection 3 times. That's less than the president. Once in 1991. With $139,689 in unpaid claims brought by the Internal Revenue Service and other creditors, according to court records, a whopping $139,000. That was a dinner tab for the bankrupt Donald Trump at the time. In 2005, Korfman paid a fine for driving a boat without lights. Oh my God. That is a hardened criminal right there. In 2010, it's unsafe. I'm not making light of it. Don't go out there and drive your boat without lights, kids. I'm not saying to do that. Stay in school. Be smart. In 2010, she was working at a convenience store when she was charged with a misdemeanor for selling beer to a minor. The charge was dismissed, court records show. So, therefore, no, she's not guilty, and so technically, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, all the technicalities that, well, she was 14, but she looked 16. Well, she was 14 when she was working as a Santa's helper, but he waited until she was 16 to ask her, and that's okay under Alabama law. Well, Jesus, Mary, Joseph. And I'm not just, cursing here. They were actually brought into the debate. I'm not kidding. If you missed the first hour of the show, go back and listen. And the courts, it was dismissed, right? Don't sell beer to minors. We don't like that. But come on. That's funny, though. He mistook her for 16 when she was 14. But she told him. But initially he mistook it. Just as she later in life mistook this 19-year-old to be 21. And so can't we all just get along? The other 3 women who spoke to the Post say that Moore asked them on dates when they were between 16 and 18 and he was in his early 30s. We heard the story earlier of Gloria Thacker Deason. She says she was 18, Moore 32 when they met in 1979 at the Gadsden Mall where she worked at the jewelry counter of a department store called Pizzitt's. I'm guessing at the pronunciation of that one. I don't know that story. She says she was attending Gadsden State Community College, at least she was a college student, and living at home. My mom was really, really strict, and my curfew was 10:30, but she would let me stay out later with Roy. This is an interesting story, said Deason, who is now 57 and lives in North Carolina. She just felt like I would be safe with him. She thought he was a good husband material. I guess they're thinking long term and possible marriage. And she's 18 and she's in college. And he's older. I don't know. Mom, strict. She thought he would be safe. I don't know, because he's a district attorney, I guess. And people get fooled by this stuff all the time. Deason says they dated on and off for several months and that he took her to his house at least 2 times. She says their physical relationship did not go further than kissing and hugging. He liked Eddie Rabbit and I liked Freddie Mercury. Well, you were going to be disappointed in Freddie if you were thinking maybe he was husband material, but I don't think there was any indication. He might have been, but just not for you. All I'm saying. Anyway, Deason says, referring to the country singer and the British rocker, okay, I guess that's a mismatch in some way or another. She says that Moore would pick her up for dates at the mall or at college basketball games where she was a cheerleader, just never at home, interestingly enough. She remembers changing out of her uniform before they went out for dinners at a pizzeria called Mater's, where she says Moore would order bottles of Mateus Rosé, or at a Chinese restaurant where she says he would order her tropical cocktails at a time when she believed she was younger than 19, the legal drinking age. Would you pick me? So he's husband material because he picks you up anywhere but at home and will buy you drinks. He's not drinking, but he'll sneak you some drinks. Mateus Rosé over at Mater's. How about it, baby? Or tropical drinks at the Chinese restaurant. Okay. If Mother had known that, she would have had a hissy fit, says Deason, and she's not referring to Mrs. Pence. She's her own mother, who says she turned 19 in May of 1979 after she and Moore started dating. Around the same time, the Deason says she met Moore at the jewelry counter. Wendy Miller says that Moore approached her at the mall, where she would spend time with her mom, who worked at the photo booth there. Miller says this was in 1979 when she was 16. She says Moore's face was familiar because she had first met him 2 years before when she was dressed as an elf and working as a Santa's helper at the mall. She says that Moore told her she looked pretty isn't that what you say to all the elves at the Santa thing? Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, everybody. Notice I say Merry Christmas and not Happy Holidays. You're looking particularly beautiful today. Elf, Santa's helper. Just wanted to say that. How old are you? 14. Well, Merry Christmas, and also Merry Christmas next year and the year after that if I don't see you, after which I will be back to ask you out because I am fully aware of Alabama law. Just wanted to say that. No particular reason. Okay, and I like that. His face is familiar. That's the guy with sleeves and the button-down shirt. You talk to that guy? Wow, you're really on the make there. But you are 14. You should chill out for 2 years or so before you talk to him again. I remember you. You're the guy that hits on the Santa's helpers, and I liked it. I don't know. It was exciting, like they said. Hi. Anyway, she says that Moore told her she looked pretty. 2 years later, he began asking her out on dates in the presence of her mother at the photo booth. So there might even be photo evidence about that. She says she had a boyfriend at the time and declined. So, okay. Her mother, Martha Brackett, says she refused to grant Moore permission to date her 16-year-old daughter. I'd say, you're too old for her. Let's not rob the cradle, Brackett recalls telling Moore at the photo booth. That's it. He asked her out on dates in the presence of her mother. At least that's the only one of the four that I've seen reported so far that mom is around to hear that. And what do they say? Don't rob the cradle. They actually literally say that. Miller, who's now 54 and lives in Alabama still, says she was flattered by the attention. It's a repeat story we hear. Now that I've gotten older, she says, the idea that a grown man would want to take out a teenager, that's disgusting to me. Well, there you go. It's been such a huge demographic shift, says Larry Sabato, right? I guess so. Whatever happened to Debbie Gibson? Here's the story of Debbie Gibson. Debbie Wesson Gibson, not the one you're thinking of, says she was 17 in the spring of 1981 when Moore spoke to her Etowah High School civics class about serving as the assistant district attorney. This is 1981. 2 years later, she's 17 at this point, which means she was 15 at that point, which means she was older than Lee when he started taking Lee to his house in the woods. She was a year older, but he didn't find her until 2 years after that when she was in high school civics. Just want to lay out the timeline here. Okay. I don't know. It's important. She says that when he asked her out, she asked her mother what she would say if she wanted to date a 34-year-old man. Interesting. Gibson says her mother asked her who the man was. And when Gibson said Donald Trump, she said, I never heard of the guy because he wasn't famous anywhere but New York. But no, that's not what happened. By the way, yeah, they would be about the same age there, right? That would be Donald Trump. He's 70, and so is Roy Moore. So I guess they are a product of their times. Sure, Right. Well, what would you say if I wanted to date a 34-year-old man? I would say, why do you want to know what I would think? Well, it's just a hypothetical. Well, who's the man? And when Gibson, this is funny, when Gibson said Roy Moore, her mother said, I'd say you were the luckiest girl in the world. I'd say that's overstating the case, but that's what was said. Now, I guess because, well, he's an assistant district attorney. He's on the make. He's on the rise. He's having a meteoric rise. He is. Never mind. Anyway, locally he was. Yeah, he was an assistant district attorney, and it was well known that he was going places, like into the woods, for instance. Among the locals in Gadsden, a town of about 47,000 back then, Moore had this godlike, almost deity status, really. He was a hometown boy made good, Gibson says, West Point, and so forth. That's true. That does argue in his favor. Gibson says that they dated for 2 to 3 months and that he took her to his house, read her poetry, and played his guitar. Wow. It's just like Delta House. She says he kissed her once in his bedroom and once by the pool at a local country club. Looking back, I'm glad nothing bad happened, says Gibson, who now lives in Florida. As a mother of daughters, I realized that our age difference at that time made our dating inappropriate. Okay. She's aware. By 1982, Moore was, by his own account in his book, causing a stir in the district attorney's office for his willingness to criticize the workings of the local legal system. He convened a grand jury to look into what he alleged were funding problems in the sheriff's office. In response, Moore writes, the State Bar Association investigated him for going against the advice of the district attorney, an inquiry that was dismissed. Soon after, Moore quit and began his first political campaign for the county's circuit court judge position. He lost overwhelmingly, and I guess he's not a deity after all, and left Alabama shortly thereafter, heading to Texas, where he says in his book he trained as a kickboxer, and to Australia, where he says he lived on a ranch for a year wrangling cattle. That is very interesting. He returned to Gadsden in 1984 and went into private law practice. In 1985, at age 38, he married Kayla Kaiser, who was 24. Still an age difference there, but not that much. Let's see, 24, he was 38, so when he was 32 back in the day, 32, that's 6 years, 24, she would have been 18, so just a little bit older than Debbie, and not that much older than the other young lady who was the cheerleader, whose name I've already forgotten, unfortunately. I scroll back and try to figure it out. Was, where was it? No. Deason, right? There we are. Gloria Thacker Deason. So they're the same age. So, he likes that age group. He likes that age cohort. He's like a pollster. He just wants to keep going back and be consistent. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, the rest of the story, I guess, is the standard story. He becomes a circuit judge. He hangs his wooden 10 Commandments. Then he gets a bigger judge job, so he gets a bigger 10 Commandments. 5,200 pounds of granite 10 Commandments. I said 10 tons. It's not. It's less than that. 2003, he's dismissed from the bench. You remember that? That's when he first became famous as the 10 Commandments judge. The story goes on from there, but you recall, his recent political history. All this has made Moore a hero, the 10 Commandments part anyway, to many Alabama voters who consider him a stalwart Christian willing to stand up for their values or lie down with their daughters. I didn't say that. In a September Republican primary for the seat vacated by Attorney General Sneaky Jefferson Sessions, Moore defeated the appointed sitting Senator Luther Strange. You know that story. You know that Trump was reluctant to endorse him at first, went with Luther Strange, even though he was, while he was endorsing him and was down there at a rally, said, maybe this is a mistake. I think I like Roy Moore better, blah, blah, blah. And he's since been 100% on board. During a visit home in the mid-1990s to see her mother and stepfather in Alabama, Korfman Lee, remember her, the 14-year-old in the first story, said she saw Moore's photo in the Gadsden Times. Mother, do you remember this guy? Wells said, Korfman said at the time. That's when Korfman told her. Wells recalls her daughter said that not long after the court hearing in 1979, Moore took her to his house. Wells said that her daughter conveyed to her that Moore had behaved inappropriately. I was horrified, Wells said. Years later, Korfman says She saw a segment about Moore on ABC News' Good Morning America, and she says she threw up, which is about close to where I am on this one. There were times, Korfman said, she thought about confronting Moore. At one point during the late 1990s, she said she became so angry that she drove to the parking lot outside Moore's office at the county courthouse in Gadsden. She sat there for a while, she says, rehearsing what she might say to him. "Remember me?" she imagined herself saying. And that's the end of the Washington Post story. That's loaded with tension, of course. And, Korfman's right to be angry. She's probably a little bit angry with herself for not confronting him earlier, but we all can understand that. This story was rife with all sorts of storylines, and amazingly enough, like I said, up at the top of the show, and you know by now, they spent all day yesterday, and they're likely to spend all day today defending this behavior. Again, all you need to know, he picked her up around the corner. Long story short, we'll be right back. Welcome back once again to the Roy Moore in the Morning Show, I guess. That's what it's turning into here, and I think we're maybe overdoing it, but it's a big, big story, and I had a lot to vent about. And there's more input here now as we wrap things up here. Athena, 5000, telling us it's true. The mall was the place to be for teens, certainly at the time anyway, and of course a predator would go there. That's true. It's also, I don't know what else was going on in Gadsden at the time. It may have been the only place to be for anybody. But, yeah, that's likely true. Let's see. Here's an interesting observation. Michael Musson saying, wait, Roy Moore was a prosecutor, and the woman, I think we're talking about Lee, had minor run-ins with the law, and Roy didn't interact with her in any official capacity. I guess it's entirely possible. There were probably multiple assistant district attorneys at the time, and she may have been in the juvenile system. I don't know. Or maybe there was interaction, or maybe he... maybe she just lucked out and she drew another prosecutor. Maybe he avoided I don't know. But it's a good question, worth finding out a little bit more about, I guess. Okay, let's see. Where else were we going with this one? Let's see. Scrolling back a little bit more. Yes, this story is a minefield. That's absolutely true. We're back with Triceps here. Hi, how you doing? You enjoying the show? It is difficult. Let's see. More from Thelonious. Isn't it curious that before the famous sexual revolution, Elvis Presley started dating a 14-year-old? He was not ostracized, his career not killed. Well, he's dead. Basically by the time Roy Moore, when did Elvis die? It was a little later than 1979, wasn't it? Should I know this? Is this like a cultural blind spot that I don't know the very date and hour that Elvis Presley died? But let's check it out. I mean, my recollection is that it's right about this time, isn't it? 77. He was dead earlier than that. So it was 2 years past Presley's death. I mean, I guess you could say, I mean, no one suggests it, but I suppose I wouldn't be surprised if Roy Moore was like, well, I'm troubled by this. I'm 32, and I like 14-year-olds. But it's okay because Elvis did, and Elvis is a god. And at this point, he still was, right? I mean, though we were learning at that point, we're like, well, Elvis was a bit of a mess, which is what killed him. And maybe we shouldn't hold him up as a golden idol, but maybe that didn't reach the, Gadsden, Alabama until later. It's true. There was definitely some development of the culture, a shift going on. No doubt about that. I think we have to recognize that. So where were we? Isn't it curious that before the famous sexual revolution, Elvis Presley started dating a 14-year-old. He was not ostracized, his career not killed. They later married and had a family. Yeah, it was weird, and I think looking back now, I mean, do we not look back now and say, Elvis, that was a weird guy? I mean, there are still places where he's revered, yes, but I mean, he's more, I think at this point, I mean, I guess for the music part, people separate it because the guy's dead, and what are you going to do? So some people are still willing to say, for instance, the music, right? He's not been ostracized. We don't, the way we would now we'll be looking askance at the work of Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and others and say, it disturbs me now to see the way this is done. We didn't do that with Elvis Presley, but instead we just sort of either forgot about him entirely. The music scene has pretty much bypassed Elvis Presley, right? And now I think culturally speaking, the name is still there. The icon floats out there, but when you look at the music or you look at the total work product and the lifespan and the Las Vegas Elvis is a joke at this point. He's like a weird, creepy cultural joke. Elvis impersonators in Las Vegas, parachuting Elvis impersonators into movies about Las Vegas. You get the idea. To me, my generation, and I'm old, relatively speaking. And by the way, I'm nearly 50, so I'm pretty close in age to these women, right? Elvis was always a kind of a joke to me, but that's because I'm from New Jersey, maybe. But, Elvis was like the stuff old people like. And then it turned out, and also he was a weirdo and a drug addict and a pervert and a wacko. So, I don't know. Elvis, to say he hasn't been ostracized and he's welcome in society. Not my society. Me, you tell me you're a huge Elvis Presley fan, and I say, there's actually possibly something wrong with you. Well, what do you mean, huge Elvis Presley fan? Like your house is decorated in Elvis Presley pictures, or you just like that rockabilly kind of music, or what? Or are you a drug addict and a child molester? I don't know. What does it mean? Okay. But Thelonious' comments continue. So they later married and had a family. We all believe that we are less puritanical than we were in 1960. Do we? I mean, I was, because I wasn't born. But as a culture, we're less puritanical than we were in... And it's weird, too, because I don't even know exactly how to answer that, because it's coming to light that we weren't particularly puritanical back then. We just like to think that we were, or go back to the old days when, conservatives, I want to go back to the 50s, the good old days when things were blah, 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 people were doing these things all the time. That's how we're all here. They were having sex all the time. And, in the office and out of the office and with each other and with each other and, other people's husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, etc. In all fashions. They just hid it and pretended it wasn't happening. And I think the sexual revolution, to the extent that I understand it, was about, don't worry so much about hiding it all, because that creates its own, problems, let's say. And if you were more open about it, those problems might not develop in as acutely as they do otherwise. And you'll be able to work through these things and live a life that doesn't include so many other complications and get in your way mentally, physically, intellectually. But I don't know. Maybe that wasn't the main intent of the sexual revolution. And it wasn't all great either. And by the way, a lot of people got the short end of the stick on that. As with most revolutions, I guess, if you really think about it. All right, let's see. Was there more to... Yes. Thelonious also says, I recently met a 75-year-old woman, just met her casually, right? Everything's cool, right? Who set her sights on an older man when she was 14. This does happen. He was 23. All right, so a little closer in age. But still, I think, certainly the law would say, that don't help you, Annie. 23, 14, same outcome as 32, 14. She managed to stay in touch and married him when she was 21. They are still married today. Okay. So, I will say she's 14. She waits another 50% of her lifespan at that point to get married. That's a pretty significant chunk of time. It's another 7 years before she turns 21 and marries him. And, it's not that you can't meet someone and then say, that's someone I later in life would like to have a serious relationship with. And then you wait and you contact them later and then get serious later. Okay. That happened. I'm not certain what I'm supposed to learn from that one, but okay. It's out there. Let's see. Karen says, I think you should take the Mary and Joseph story on the stand-up circuit. Very funny. That's a good way to get killed, probably, but and make almost no money. However, it might be slightly more than I'm making with it here on the sit-down circuit, I guess. Thank you. Thank you, yes. Not I guess, thank you. I guess I would make more money. Thank you, definitely. And what else? Kate Sherrill sends us another one, this time a tweet from Justin Miller. She says, the signs were there all along. Justin says Roy Moore sided with convicted rapists of underage girls, citing a article in the New York Times, excerpted here. In a 2015 case involving a man, David Pittman, I'm sure he's glad to be a part of this again, who pleaded guilty to raping an underage girl, Mr. Moore wrote in a dissenting opinion, this must be the 8-1 thing, right, that Mr. Pittman should have been allowed to introduce evidence showing his alleged victim's parents, quote, suspected her of sexual activity, unquote, because it could be relevant to discerning her, quote, alleged motive in claiming she had been assaulted. Well, if she was underage, she was assaulted, period. That's what statutory rape means. And in 2014 case, involving a man convicted of abusing 2 underage girls, Mr. Moore wrote in dissenting opinion that the man, Sherman Tate, should have had the chance in court to demonstrate that his accusers were romantically involved with each other. Really. Mr. Moore wrote that that connection could be relevant to the victim's alleged bias against Tate. Okay, so he's certainly not somebody who believes strongly in those bright lines that we like to draw in our society, and maybe that means he's out of step with, at the minimum, we can say he's out of step with Alabamans and doesn't belong in the Senate, but he might not be out of step with them. They may love it, who knows, or they may just hate Democrats more. There's plenty of evidence that that's the case, and boy, oh boy, tax cuts, that's worth it, I say. Who in Alabama could really honestly look me in the eye and say that they wouldn't trade allowing a 32-year-old to, stick their hands down their 14-year-old daughter's pants in exchange for a couple $100 annually, right? I mean, that's what you're saying, isn't it? It isn't? Oh, okay. Well, you try and straighten that one out for me. All right, let's see. Other stories that deserve attention. Well, gosh, there's a lot of them. Oh, by the way, the P-tape is real. I don't know if I told you that. We're inching ever closer to that one coming out. That comes to us by way of NBC News and their report that Trump bodyguard Keith Schiller has testified that Russians offered Trump women, but he says they turned them down. Ken Delanian and Jonathan Allen teamed up on this one after a business meeting before the Miss Universe pageant in 2013, exactly when we suspected that this P-tape business was going on. A Russian participant in the business meeting, and there were several, and we know about them, and we have a list of who was there in many cases, offered to, quote, send 5 women to Donald Trump's hotel room in Moscow, his longtime bodyguard told Congress this week, according to 3 sources who were present for the interview. 2 of the sources said the bodyguard, Keith Schiller, viewed the offer as a joke and immediately responded, "We don't do that type of stuff." The 2 sources said Schiller's comments came in the context of him adamantly disputing the allegations made in the Trump dossier, so he's directly addressing them. It's not an independent corroboration elsewhere. But it is interesting that his denial of the allegations in the Trump dossier as well. The allegation is somebody sent 5 women to his hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton before the Miss Universe pageant. And, of course, the allegation is that they then urinated on the bed and at his invitation because he believed that President Obama and his wife, Michelle, had stayed in that room and presumably slept in that bed while they were in Moscow, and therefore something, and by voodoo principles, he was really peeing on Obama. I don't know. I can't really figure it out. It doesn't matter. Keith Schiller says it never happened. We turned it down. All that happened, the only thing that's really true about the dossier is every other allegation made in it, minus the P-tape, plus back the part about where we were staying at the Ritz-Carlton, and somebody said something about sending women to his room who were presumably not room service or housekeeping, let's say, and something, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how the P came into it, but it's all untrue right up to the point where we're in the Ritz-Carlton during the Miss Universe pageant and somebody says, I'm going to send 5 women to your room. Beyond that, it's not true. And also everything else is false, except that which is not. It's a little uncomfortable, but it's a tenable position, right? And by the way, I mean, we might as well just throw this one out there. Does anybody really think I know there's lots of you who are like, oh, yeah, right, he turned them down. Well, okay, maybe not. But is there anybody out there who thinks, would this be a ridiculous statement? The Russians say, oh, boy, Donald Trump is here, and he's a lech, and he's here for the Miss Universe pageant, which means he's in lech mode. Let's send prostitutes to his room, and we'll videotape him and see what we get. Now, I doubt very much where they were like, if we are smart enough to send some women to his room, what we're going to get is him saying, pee on the bed. That probably wasn't the bed. Right. But that was probably a surprise if it happened, which it did. Not. Maybe. I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm not sure. I take that back. I don't know what happened. Anyway, the point is that it should not be beyond belief. It should be well within our thresholds of belief. It should not stretch the bounds for us to imagine that the Russians say, let's send 5 women to his room, or even 6, really. These are Russians we're talking about. And we'll videotape him and we'll have compromat on him. And it's possible that he said no, because it's possible, Trump probably knows very well that the Russian hotel rooms are going to be wired for video and sound, and that you're very likely to be entrapped in something horrible if you agree to do that. And he knew that, 1, because he knows Russians and was dealing with them a lot, and 2, because he probably was doing it in his own hotels and other facilities, and we have pretty good reason to believe he was probably doing it at Mar-a-Lago in the special bikini changing room, but we can't prove it. But he was listening into phone calls there. Surveillance is a thing with Donald Trump. It is. That's proven. It's true. So it's very likely that he knew he would be under surveillance, and therefore likely that he may have said, I don't want anything weird on tape. But I will also say this. I also think that Donald Trump is the kind of person who would say, I'm being smart here because I know I could be on videotape. They could videotape whatever goes on in this room with the 5 girls. Now, I don't know what to do because I know it would be considered rude to say no, to turn these girls down. Because the Russians, this is the way it is. This is one of those crazy, primitive Stone Age cultures, not America, where they really think that this is great. Like, I know in some cultures you're supposed to burp after you eat, and in some cultures you're supposed to take the 5 women that they send you. So here's what I'll do. I won't take my own clothes off because I don't want anybody videotaping that. I won't involve myself in any sexual behavior, but I will do this. It would be hilarious because if they tape this, it would be hilarious for it to get back to, what do I care if it gets back to Obama that these girls peed on the bed? And I laugh in your face, Obama. What are you going to do about it? So it's not entirely unlikely that he says, sure, come on up and go ahead. I'm not doing anything. You haven't got anything on me. I didn't do anything. They're the ones that did it. They peed on the bed. He might really think that. And then now in hindsight, he might say, that doesn't look so good either. Me asking for that is not good because, it may not occur to him as a sexual thing. I don't know what he's into, but maybe afterwards. Oh, I read on the internet where that's a sex thing. Anyway, my original point was it shouldn't be beyond belief that the Russians want to send 5 girls there, that he says, I'm too smart for that. Mm-hmm. We'll grant him the benefit of the doubt. But that they... And maybe he says, no, don't even come in here. There's no P-tape, no nothing, right? Don't come into this room. I can't even have you in here, period. I don't want it. The end. No. And that if that happened, that the Russians would say, to hell with it. Why don't we just say we have it anyway and see what happens? Because it's going to cause a lot of trouble for him in the future if we say that he's got this stuff. They probably didn't know he was going to run for president at that point, didn't have any idea that he could possibly even win. But what the hell? We'll have compromat or be able to threaten compromat on him. And then it becomes a he said, 2 he's saying it in this one. Fine, we get what we want out of it. In other words, it shouldn't be beyond belief that the Russians just lied. We tried to set him up. He said no, but we're going to say he said yes and that we have something on him because what the hell? Let's roll the dice. So it's possible. Anyway, Schiller insists the whole thing didn't happen. We don't really know whether it happened or not, but I do think that there's room in the middle for Trump thinking it's not so bad if he has them in the room and has them pee on this bed because he in his mind, I'm not doing anything. And it doesn't occur to him that it would be damaging to have videotape of him saying, yes, do that, and him laughing and clapping, or not even being in the tape. I don't know. So, he might think they don't have anything because I wasn't in the room, but I did tell him to pee on the bed. That's conjecture on my part. And it's Friday. It's Conjecture Friday. I didn't tell you very much to get yourself prepared, to get you prepared for discussion this weekend. I feel bad about that one, but I mean, what else are people going to be talking about? Now you're well versed in the Roy Moore story, plus the P-tape story, and that'll carry you through any situation, I think. Let's see. Other situations that you need to be aware of. ProPublica, like doing real news reporting about real subjects and not getting sunlight, not getting attention and oxygen here on the show today. My mistake. Trump Voter Fraud Commission is sued by one of its own commissioners. That's a story. Jessica Huseman brings us that one. Maine's Secretary of State. Thank you, Bill. I know you talked to him and said, you should do this. Matthew Dunlap. Did you? You should have. Matthew Dunlap alleges the group's leadership is violating transparency laws. No. And has excluded him from deliberations. Good move, I think, suing them here. There's an update at the top of this here. Responses from Chris Kobach and Andrew Cossack, co-chair and executive director, respectively, of the Voter Fraud Commission, have been added to this story, most of which you'll have to read for yourself. Here's the gist of it. A Democratic member, did you know there were some, of the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity filed suit against the commission in federal court in Washington, D.C. on Thursday morning, alleging that its Republican leadership has intentionally excluded him from deliberations and violated federal transparency laws. The commission has been sued more times, 8, as a matter of fact, including this new filing, than it has officially convened for meetings, 2 times. So they're getting 4 lawsuits per meeting at this point. The suit, filed by Maine Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap, accuses the commission of violating the Federal Advisory Commission Act, which, among other things, requires that advisory committees be bipartisan and sets transparency requirements for them. Everything we are doing is absolutely perpendicular to that, Dunlap charged in an interview. We aren't inviting the public to participate, we aren't transparent, and we aren't even working together at all. My real fear is that this commission will only offer policy recommendations that have not been properly vetted by all of the commissioners. Or will offer, not only, but will offer. The complaint contends Dunlap has been and continues to be blocked from receiving commission documents necessary to carry out his responsibilities. So it's all window dressing, right? We have to be bipartisan? Fine. That's what the law says. We'll invite Democrats to be on it, and then we'll just not invite them to any of the meetings and leave them out of everything. Well, that'll get you sued. So that's what's going on. There's more detail on that, and ProPublica being on the case, you're going to get a thoroughly reported and well-narrated story, but like I said, we're coming up against the end of the show today, and there are other things that need discussion, things you do need to be aware of, and I will include some links so you can read up or trade articles with your friends over the weekends. Collect them all. Here's one, a headline that I think headline opportunity that was missed out on. The basics of the story. Carl Icahn, how does he say it? I-C-A-H-N. You all know he's a big Trump guy. Well, I can't use the original version of it, but over at Bloomberg News, the word is that Icahn has been subpoenaed. U.S. subpoenas Icahn over biofuel action while Trump advisor. So Carl Icahn finds himself under scrutiny, this time by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And interesting story there. I think the missed headline, of course, here was the opportunity to run with the Icahn has subpoena headline. I'm not certain why they didn't go for that one at Bloomberg. I thought they were online savvy. What's going on? The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York is seeking production of information pertaining to Icahn's activities regarding the renewable fuel standard, according to a Form 10Q that Icahn Enterprises LP filed on Friday with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Investigators also want information about his role as an advisor to the president, the document says. And Icahn Enterprises says they're cooperating with the request, providing information in response to the subpoena. The U.S. Attorney's Office has not made any claims or allegations against us or Mr. Icahn. And I guess we're not quite at that point, but something you ought to be aware of so that you can study up on it and chat with your pals over the weekend on the subject. We probably should have gotten back to David Dayen's stories about Wilbur Ross, but hopefully you read those that we provided in yesterday's roundup. And let's see, what other things can we sneak in before the buzzer rings on us? Let's see. I will include for your weekend edification, let's see, some write-ups of the tax bill, including a link to a tweet storm written by Seth Hanlon. Seth Hanlon is a senior fellow at American Progress, and the tweet storm I have in mind begins this way. The Republican tax bill looks like it was written by Donald Trump's accountants and tax lawyers, and I'm not even joking. It would be hard to design a tax plan more friendly to billionaire real estate magnates like the Trumps and the Kushners of the world. Where to begin? He begins with the Trump loophole, the special low tax rate for wealthy pass-through owners, and goes on from there. In other words, the thing has actually literally been written, I guess, with they figure if it passes, terrific, and if not, well, then what the hell? We were never serious in the first place, but we got to put together a tax proposal. It might as well be my accountant's wish list for deductions for me. Let's see. Finally, one or two other stories that we can include for your weekend reading. Oh, yes. You know what? Speaking of Keith Schiller, we had a related story that The Hill picked up on. Interesting. So I don't remember which outlet it was that said, oh, yes, we will pick up on the fact that he was having women invited to the hotel room. The Hill, on the other hand, went with this headline, this other highlight of the testimony. Trump bodyguard would go to McDonald's when White House chef couldn't get burger just right, according to the report. So when the White House chef couldn't get your burger right, at least you could fall back on McDonald's. It makes me wonder what getting a burger right means. But more to the point, I think, was the tweet that brought this story to my attention, which I don't know whether I set it aside or not, but basically the tweet was that Trump's bodyguard, Schiller, was saying he used to go on secret McDonald's runs for Trump. And I was just thinking about the various photos we've seen of the man in the last couple of months. I'm wondering who we think these McDonald's runs were being kept secret from. I mean, maybe we didn't know the source of his growth, let's say. But I think McDonald's was a pretty good guess. And, of course, he gets photographed all the time, at least during the campaign, eating McDonald's. He makes no secret of his love for McDonald's. But there you have it, the sophisticated palate of Donald Trump. I know steaks, and Trump steaks are beautiful and terrific and lovely. And if they can't get my hamburger right at the White House, you can tell how much I love good steak by the fact that I would send my personal bodyguard out for a McDonald's run when it doesn't come out right. How do you like that? By the way, how does he like his burger? It's in here. He would pick up a quarter pounder with cheese, no pickles, and extra ketchup, along with a fried apple pie for the president. So I am glad that he got what he was looking for. That's good news. There's apparently no reason for him to head out to the Trump Steakhouse for delicious USDA prime grade A beef when a quarter pounder with cheese, no pickles, and extra ketchup, just like the kids like it, with the fried apple pie for the president. Okay, well, I guess that explains why he eats what he eats on his foreign trips as well. That's about all we can cram in there for today, but I do remind you that opening soon, more specifically on Monday, I think. Yes, are we ready for that on Monday, Justice? We have, as you know, we've traditionally been followed here by the after show. Today will be followed by Democracy Now!, and so we'll extend your edification programming day with that. But on Monday, I think, yes, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, the new program with Justice Putnam, Mondays through Fridays right after this show. Best, let's see, described briefly as tasty news and spirited interviews. And we appreciate the interview format there. We need to do more of that here, but I like to freeform it here. We'll be back with more on Monday. Who can even tell where this weekend is going to take us? At this point, I couldn't even begin to guess. Maybe it was too much on the Roy Moore thing, but if that doesn't have your outrage meter up, I don't know what we'll do. Oh, yes, and by the way, update for you. Julie Briskman, the woman photographed flipping the bird to Donald Trump last weekend, who became, infamous, I guess you could say. I say famous for what she did, and then by Monday had been revealed to the world by name, and we found out she had been fired from her job. Remember the convoluted process through which they did that. And I mentioned to you that there was at least one GoFundMe page out there. I talked to Julie. She says she's been contacted. There are 3 out there currently. All 3 of the owners of those pages have been in contact with her, and they are, in fact, transferring, I think, the accounts to her control. At least the money will be getting to her anyway. That's
from
news.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So, thanks for listening and for sticking with us through the weekend. You can go and find the link to so far, the most popular of the Thank You, Julie Briskman pages at our morning post this morning. And if you explore on GoFundMe and type in her name, you'll find the way there. You can support her in this rough time. I'll talk to you next week.